May 26th board meeting. Would you please call the roll?
Mayor Hales.
Here.
Mr. Delaney.
Present.
Mr. Doherty.
Here.
Mr. Lehman.
Here.
Okay, welcome everyone. Let's start with approval of minutes from our April 28th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Or if not, is there a motion to approve?
Move approval. Second.
Discussion, roll call on approving the minutes.
Mr. Lehman.
Aye.
Mr. Doherty.
Aye.
Mayor Hales.
Aye.
Mr. Delaney.
Aye.
Okay. Good afternoon, Sam. Anything you have to report before we start with public comment?
No. Not,
Okay.
not
So I
today.
don't know if anyone signed up during our public comment period. Do we have anyone signed up? Okay, then we'll move on to action items. So let's take up action item number 1. Resolution number 500 on tax anticipation notes. Nancy.
Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Hartline, Fpdr Financial Manager. Resolution 500 is our annual authorization to borrow in anticipation of tax proceeds. So this is a resolution for the board to authorize the sale of tax anticipation notes in an amount not to exceed $31,885,000. There is an ordinance on council's agenda tomorrow that will ask council to authorize the borrowing.
And this is a routine borrowing. This is nothing
Yes.
extraordinary about this. We do
Yes.
this
This is
based on the cycle of when revenues come in.
Right. We generally run out of cash in the end of August or the end of September. And as you all know, tax revenues start coming in November. So there's a several-month gap there. At this point, we expect to need about $21 million plus whatever working capital amount we add based on the board's decision for the FPDR2 benefit adjustment. There may or may not be some retro payments to be added to that. So.
Okay.
Nancy, what's the max amount we approved last year, and what did we actually do?
I apologize for not having that with me. It was, I'm
Comparable?
going to say it was on the order of $30 million for the resolution, and we borrowed about, I think, 24.
So same kind of outcome expected here. You get authority to borrow more than you usually end up actually needing.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So does anyone want to speak on this item? And if not, we simply need to adopt the resolution. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Any further discussion before we take a vote on adopting the resolution? So roll call vote on adopting the resolution, please.
Mr. Lehman.
Aye.
Mr. Doherty.
Aye.
Mayor Hales.
Aye.
Mr. Delaney.
Aye.
Okay. You make this look easy compared to other places.
We got the easy one out of the way.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to action item number 2, benefit adjustment review.
So now we have the FPDR2 benefit adjustment slideshow, which
Okay.
is there. All right. And in addition to this material, and I'm going to ask Ken to join me in case you have any questions for him. We also have Matt Larrabee of Milliman here if you have any actuarial
Good.
questions.
And slide that whole box a little closer to you, Nancy. That whole monster thing
Oh,
moves. There
okay.
we go.
Better?
Yeah, low tech, but it works better. Thank
I
you.
like the low tech. So in addition to the slideshow handout, what I also had passed out to you was something that was just published this morning on the PERS website for their Friday meeting, talking about their implementation of the Morrow decision. And I'll call your attention to the first bullet where it says their plan is to pay a 2% COLA to all benefit recipients effective July 1, 2015, payable August 1, 2015. Although this COLA will not be the precisely correct amount, as it will be on the recipient's current benefit and not be allocated for those who will receive less than a 2% COLA in the future, we can process the 2% COLA with current functionality, and it takes a large step towards restoring recipients to the correct benefit amount. So we still don't know exactly what PERS is going to do. We may know more after the Friday's meeting, but at this point, we have at least staff's statement of their direction.
Okay.
So some of this presentation may be less useful at this point, but
Because of that clarity from PERS.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, or lack of clarity.
Oh, shit, giving them credit by calling that clarity, yeah.
So we're here today to discuss how to determine the FPDR2 benefit adjustment methodology for 2015, for the board to decide whether or not to revisit the 2013 and 2014 adjustments as you had reserved the right to do, and then decide whether to maintain the annual review of benefit adjustments or to determine a methodology for staff to calculate future adjustments. Given the uncertainty with the PERS situation, I don't see how we can do the third bullet today, and perhaps not for some time to come. So starting with background, as you all know, FPDR1 benefits are tied to first-class firefighter or first-class police officer pay. Their benefits will increase by 2.1% effective July 1. But for FPDR2 members, Charter Section 5312 gives the board discretion in the amount of FPDR2 benefit adjustments, subject to not exceeding the PERS rate for sworn retirees. Prior to 2011, staff followed the original administrative rule that basically said, go do what PERS does. And then what PERS was doing was a CPI change up to a 2% cap with a bank for any CPI change above 2% for use in lower inflation years. And then in 2011, the FPDR administrative rule was changed for the board to annually review FPDR2 adjustments, as we're doing today. In 2011 and 12, the board exercised its discretion to approve adjustments that continued to equal the applicable PERS rate by cohort or retirement year. 2011, the CPI increase was 1.25%, and the adjustment rates were 1.25% for retirees who retired in fiscal year end 2009 to 11 because they had no bank built up, and 2% for all earlier retirees. And then in 2012, the CPI change was 2.86%, and adjustment rates were approved for 2% for everybody. Then in 2013, the Oregon legislature changed the PERS COLA. Senate Bill 822 set the COLA for 2013 at 1.5%, and the FPDR board approved 1.5% for all retirees. And then 2014 and future COLAs were set by Senate Bill 861 as 1.25% on the first 60,000 of annual base and 0.15% on amounts over 60,000. PERS members also got supplementary payments of 1/4 to 0.5%. FPDR could not do that, and the supplemental payments were subsequently voided by the Morrow decision. So the FPDR board approved 1.25% for all, perhaps because the supplementary payments were not something that FPDR could do. And then challenges to the COLA changes were referred to the Oregon Supreme Court, and that became Morrow versus State of Oregon. On April 30th of this year, the Oregon Supreme Court handed down its Morrow decision, concluding that PERS members have a right to the pre-amendment COLA for work performed before the amendment's effective dates for Senate Bill 861, that's October 8th of 2013, but that COLA can be amended for periods of future service. So what this means is that pre-amendment PERS retirees get the old method and post-amendment retirees get a blend of the old and new. We don't know if those rates will remain stable, whether the $60,000 threshold for the post-amendment calculation will remain stable. because Senate Bill 861 still requires the PERS Board to report COLA recommendations to the governor and the legislature in 2018. So a lot of uncertainty still. For FPDR, the board's 2015 adjustment options are to utilize its discretion up to the PERS rate. We can interpret the PERS rate as the maximum rate paid by PERS to sworn retirees, which would be 2%. That could exceed the CPI change in low inflation years. But for 2015, the CPI change is 2.41%. The board has generally approved an adjustment rate by retirement class or cohort equal to the applicable PERS rate for each cohort. So the board may approve 2% or less, including the use of a blended COLA, such as PERS will have when we know what that is. So this slide on the PERS blending methodology is one option for blending. PERS may or may not use this years of service method, so I'm going to go through it fairly quickly with an example of a member who retired on October 8th, 2014 with 25 years of service, has 24 years of service prior to the change and 1 year of service after, so it's 96% pre-amendment service, which would get the 2% COLA, and then the 4% of service after October 8th, 2013 would get the post-amendment rate, which in this example of somebody with a $78,000 annual base benefit would come out to about 1%. So combining the 2% and the 1% with the years of service weighting, the member's COLA would be 1.96%. So close to 2%, but not quite. FPDR could use the full PERS blend methodology, again, when we know what that might be, and if it's something that's appropriate to our plan. The board could use a modified blend methodology based on the board's use of the CPI up to 2% with the bank and the 2014 1.25% without regard to what the member's annual base benefit was. And the previous example that was 1.96% with what I'm calling the full PERS blend methodology, which may in fact not be what they do, but instead of 1.96%, it would be 1.97%. Or could simply use a modified blend of 2% for any pre-amendment service, regardless of banking of CPI changes, and 1.25% for post-amendment service. This would also yield 1.97% in this example. For the financial impact, we assumed option 2, but option 2 and option 3 are almost indistinguishable at this point. For revisiting 2013 and 2014, options include for 2013 to leave it at the 1.5% that was paid, not issue any retro payments, to increase to 2% for all, and the June 2013 retirees blended rates still round to 2.00%, and we pay COLA based on hundredths of a percentage point. So for 2013 at least, there is nothing to distinguish between 2% for all and a blended rate. For 2014, the CPI change was 2.5%. You can leave it at the 1.25% with no retro payments, increase to the blended rates, or increase up to 2% for all based on the CPI change. If the board directs us to calculate and pay retros for 2013 and 2014, we can certainly do that. Based on when the board makes the decision, we'll pay those retros in June or July. And the Morrow decision, as a note there, did uphold the change to the tax offset eligibility, so there won't be any changes there. For FPDR 3 members, we know that the OPSRP COLA will be blended. We're not sure again of the methodology, but the OPSRP tier does not have the COLA banking that PERS Tier 1 and Tier 2 have. The retirement impact on our FPDR 3 members won't be known until the PERS board reports to the governor and legislature in 2018. Although we do have our first FPDR 3 retiree just this month. And then contributions will increase starting in fiscal year 27-18 for perhaps 20 years while the additional Tier 1 and Tier 2 liability is amortized. So considerations for the board, obviously financial impact is a large one. Without retros, 1.25% would cost $1 million for the coming fiscal year. The blended and the 2% for all approaches are indistinguishable. They're about $500 apart, $1.6 million. And then if the board does decide to go with retros for 2013 and 2014, the cost of those retros would be about $1.4 million, and again, the annual cost on a slightly higher base would be $1.6 million.
Explain to me again why the blended and 2% scenarios are so close to each other.
Because the few people who have a less than 2% COLA based on a years of service blending, it's just
Oh, okay.
a very small amount for a small number of people at this
Difference
point.
between 1.96 and 2.
And 2, right.
20, 30 bucks a year times a small group of people. Okay.
Right.
I get it. All right. Yeah.
So obviously, a higher cost will mean higher demand on the FPDR levy. So when we see the next levy in a year and a half, it'll probably be closer to the, brushing the bar of the $2.80 levy limit instead of being below the bar as it was at the one we saw in January. But as I said, Matt is here if you have any questions on that. Another consideration, of course, is purchasing power impact, because 25 or 30 years of a pension payout is a long time for a benefit to lose purchasing power. The board's decision won't have much impact on the new 25-year retiree who's just retiring this year, because the blend is so close to 2%. After 25 years, both the blended and the 2% adjustments will have an 83% purchasing power value, assuming 2.75% average annual inflation. That may be a little high. But the last class of FPDR 2 retirees, the ones who entered in 2006, retiring with 25 years of service, that blended rate will only be about 1.46%, and the purchasing power with the blended COLA after 25 years will be 73% compared to 83% for the 2% COLA. And then the final consideration is the equal to or better statute. If the board were to approve an adjustment methodology inferior to PERS, we should inform PERS per the requirement to report benefit changes for possible ETOB review. But that would only be if the board decided to go, for example, with 1.25% going forward. So, given the uncertainty of where we are and what little we know about PERS direction at this point, how would the board like to proceed? Do you want to ask questions of Ken or Matt?
Yeah, so good opportunity now for questions of our team and thoughts that you have, board members. Robert.
I think my motion when we talked about the COLAs previously said that if it was overturned, it would revert to the 2%. And I believe that was the motion that was passed. So I don't know if there's a question there.
I think that's right. It's worth checking.
Was?
I don't know if it was for each COLA, but I think I know for one I did that, it might have been the second as well.
Okay, we can confirm that.
If that's the case, I mean, I don't think there's any discussion unless I'm missing something here.
Well, I think the only discussion would be whether it goes 2% for everybody or we have the blended. They didn't overturn everything, they didn't go all the way back to 2% for everybody.
Correct.
So,
For all time.
Right.
Right. And does the PERS decision turns on the October 8th date as well, right? And obviously ours does
Yes.
because theirs does. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was talking about, was just those two previous COLAs. I know we've got the next adjustment we've got to work on and figure out, because there's been no motion on that. But I think the two previous ones, I think it said we were going to go to 2%. So I don't know.
I think 2013 said you'll revisit, but 2013 is the one where there's no difference between 2% and the blended.
right.
So it's just
But in
last year.
2014, we have some people with post-service.
A few.
A few.
Very small difference in the calculation.
Other questions?
Yeah,
Thoughts?
could we bring Matt up and have him talk a little bit about the levy adequacy and how these scenarios play it out?
You brought his calculator.
Matt has to do this on
Got mine
Friday
too.
for the PERS
HG.
folks anyway, so.
Yeah, this will be good practice for me.
Dave Doherty's the only other person I know that owns one of those.
I'm the only person that has that on a phone app.
That would be true.
So you have some
Well,
questions?
I don't know that you can answer this yet, and we'll bring you back. So I'm curious, based on the scenarios that Nancy has laid out for us, if you have basically stress tested the levy adequacy, because, you know, we've been together for a long time, Matt, and last year was the first time we got out of the danger zone,
Right.
and now we're right back in it. And I just wanted the board to get a sense of how bad it is if we go as far as we can, or if we need to be a little more nuanced.
Okay. I will, I'll give you the best answer that I can, considering that, A, I haven't, of course, actually conducted any analysis for it, and that is partially predicated on the fact, B, that we do not know how PERS is going to administratively implement the court's decision in Morrow. So, you know, it's a little bit of guesswork at this point in terms of how the COLAs will be calculated for future PERS retirees under the Morrow decision. There's still some uncertainty in there and things to be addressed by the PERS board. But my my overview summary of what this does to the levy adequacy analysis is, of course, that's a 20-year analysis in kind of what we call a stochastic or Monte Carlo format, where we have all sorts of future variation we allow in the model for, you know, the key things being actual investment returns in the PERS trust, and also changes in real market values that are subject to City of Portland property taxes. And what that analysis, when we presented it in January, that reflected the effects of the legislative changes before the partial overturn by the Supreme Court in Morrow. And we show our results as kind of percentiles and likelihoods, and we have a bright line drawn up at $2.80 of every thousand of real market value, because of course that's the limit that's laid out in charter. And for the first time, we did not have the items that we graphically depict, which are the 5th to the 95th percentiles. We didn't have anything in the 20 years scraping those bars. So we had a less than 5% chance in our model of having a trespass on the $2.80 limit. Now, we've obviously had the partial overturn from the Supreme Court, and so a really useful piece of information in terms of our levy modeling is the modeling that we did 2 years prior. So we came in front of the board back in January of 2013, where we showed those bars, you know, the 5th percentile on down, 5th being a bad scenario, those were being trespassed on the 280 in a limited number of scenarios, between 5 and 10%. And when that was occurring in the back 5 years of our 20-year projection. Morrow was not a complete overturn of the changes. It was mostly an overturn. We'll get into that with the PERS board on Friday. So, you know, in a sense, our projections, when we update them, will be closer to what we showed in 2013 than what we came in front of the board with in January of this year. However, when we do run those, I anticipate that they will still be slightly more optimistic than the work that we showed to the Fpdr board back in January of 2013, because a couple of other things that have happened since that January 2013 analysis are, A, real market values came in the near term. They increased more than was anticipated in the model based on consultation in City Economist over the past couple of years. And B, actual PERS investment returns since 2013 have been stronger than the baseline assumption in the model. So when it'll be time in normal course to refresh that analysis, what I'd anticipate is it will look more like what we showed in 2013, which was based on pre-Morrow, pre-legislative changes, than what we showed this year. And we'll likely see the bars kind of, depending on what happens with the markets over the next little while on the investment side and changes in real market value, we're likely to see the same sort of pattern we saw 2 years ago. 5 to 10% chance of violating the 280 levy limit in some bad scenarios. When that happens, it's typically happening in the last 5 years of a 20-year projection, and the overall likelihood of violating it in one of those modeled years maybe being closer to 10%, whereas it was 4% when we modeled it in front of the board this year.
And when will you do that kind of full analysis again?
Typically, we will do it every other January. We only do an actuarial valuation every other year, given the unfunded nature of the program. So this would, in normal course, be back in January of 2017?
Yes.
Yes.
When you presented to us in 2013, what COLA did you have in your presentation?
It was a 2% COLA at that point.
So that was showing 2%. So if you just added a higher real market value, it'd look better then.
Absolutely, yeah. The real market, you know, the levies, obviously, benefits paid and contributions to the OPSERP program of PERS for our FPDR3 members, and then the denominator is the real market value. So that's part of the reason that I feel like if we were going to rerun it right now, it would look better than 2013, but not as good as what we showed in January, because the January work was done doing a 1.25% COLA going forward, and now for a lot of members it's 2%.
And when you do that modeling, refresh my memory, do you separate those two variables of PERS investment returns and real market value and look at a couple of different scenarios?
Yeah, we have explicit modeling where we show kind of the variation that we have in Portland RMV, real market value, and also in the PERS investment returns. Our models, the two of them tend to, those two assumptions tend to talk to each other a little bit. It would be a little unusual to, you know, have the model show really strong investment returns but really poor growth in RMV. So, you know, the factors are separate, they're disclosed, but there tends to be a fairly strong correlation between the two factors.
Actually, yeah, my hunch for the next few years might be that it might be the other way around a little bit, that investment returns might not be so great, but real market value is going to continue to percolate.
There's some potential for that, given certainly for example, the low yields on fixed incomes right now, the fixed income bonds.
In that 2013, it would have shown the 2% compounding even in the 2 years we didn't get here that we're going to discuss here in a little bit.
That's correct. And when we came in front of the FPDR board in January of this year, as part of that presentation, we showed year-by-year benefit projected payments based on 125 COLA, but we also had a dash line in our presentation that showed what the benefit payments would have been at a 2% COLA year by year, so that can be a good informational item for the board in terms of the long-term effects.
So bottom line, last 5 years, probably still a few that have a 5 to 10% chance bumping up against the levy cap. Mr. McGarr, what happens when we hit the levy cap? Put it in layman's terms, please.
The benefits are required to be paid, and they would come out of the difference would come out of the general fund if that's ultimately the problem.
Well, what the charter says is that the FPDR fund can borrow from the general fund to meet the requirements. So one possible outcome might be that the general fund would issue debt and lend it to the FPDR fund for repayment after the peak had passed.
Okay, other questions for any of our professional team? And then we're going to take public testimony here on this item, but your recommendation will come in what form?
Well, why don't we come back and discuss that after you take public
Okay.
comment?
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, let's see who we have. Do we have people signed up to testify?
Retirees Jake Short, Doug Paul, PFFA President Alan Hirschweiler, and Attorney Hank McCaffrey.
Okay, well, let's take those in order. You're going to pass? Okay. All right, then Alan, come on up, please. Mr. Kaplan, come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. As I think most of you know, our firm was very much involved in the Morrow decision, and we've had a chance to study the decision. I have to admit, had a chance to carefully enough study the blending methodology that Nancy Hartline came up with. I briefly did do some calculations and came up with slightly different numbers for the actual blending methodology, and by slightly different, I'd say on the order of something like on the $78,000 example that she gave, $10 per year, so very slight. I guess I would say what we're both doing is we're trying to gaze into a crystal ball to see what some other people are going to do down in Salem, and if the board were inclined to adopt the blending methodology, the PERS blending methodology option, then I would suggest we simply wait to see what that is rather than guess. And of course, if the board were inclined to go with one of the other two methods, then I don't have any discrepancies with the calculations that Ms. Hartline has done.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For the record, Alan Hirschweiler, I'm president of the Portland Fires Association. And just some of your discussion about the fund adequacy and just doing some of the simple math, and I'm obviously not an actuarial or by any means, but we look at the ongoing costs of being $1.6 million, and we look at the budget of $166 million of the fund, which seems pretty close to 1%, that it would increase the fund. And just historically, it seems like the real market value, just from 2013 to 2014 to 2015, far exceeds 1% of what it was. And so in terms of what it is, I know until we see what the adequacy is going to be, it's difficult to judge that. But it seems like in terms of the real market value, if we add 1% to what that is, what the fund is on the original budget, compared to the real market value, that it wouldn't be, it'd be closer to 2015 than 13. And again, not seeing those numbers. Secondly, I'd just like to have a discussion about the motions that would be made, and if the board does decide to make a motion, I would wonder if that's going to be a combination of different votes versus talking about what we're going to do in 2015, and then on a separate motion, having a second one that talks about the past COLAs, and just an open up of that discussion. And again, our attorney kind of gave it the same position that we would have on the adjustments.
Wait and see what the PERS board does.
Yeah, unless it would be a full 2%, which it kind of reads like that's what the PERS board is going to do. Okay, thank you.
Questions for these guys? Brief and to the point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no one else that wants to speak on this item, let's bring Sam and Nancy back up and get your recommendations for how to proceed.
Well, one option is to wait and watch our TVs on Friday to see what the PERS board decides to do based on their staff's recommendation, and come back at the June meeting for the discussion. Another possibility is to say 2% for all for 2013, 2% for all for 2014, very little cost difference, and 2% for all for 2015, just because we don't know what PERS's methodology is going to be for blending, and I'm not sure that we will know by the June meeting. It seems unlikely. Or we can come back in June and talk about it again.
All right. Thoughts, recommendations from the board?
I personally think that we should do 2% for every year. I mean, our duty and role and responsibilities here is for the members. I understand we need to be fiscally responsible for the fund to make sure that it can provide retirement disability benefits in the future. I've heard some compelling arguments in the past about the bank and how I think the number that was presented was certain retirees were 17% behind. I still think with this COLA being 2%, we're below the cost of living increase for every one of those years. With rising health care costs and everything else, I think it's a fair and right thing to do. That's my thought.
Bring up just a clarifying question on that. If you did what Nancy said, for 13, 14, 15, you do 2%, are you looking, you're doing it just for this year, you're not making any commitment for 2016 forward, correct?
I presume, and I don't know what everybody else on the board thinks, I think either we review it every year or we adopt this blending method, and we've got to make sure that it syncs up with PERS so we're equal to or better than in the future, going forward.
And the challenge, I think, as Nancy brought up with the blending method, is that we probably won't know, even in June, exactly what PERS blending method's going to be.
And that's why I'm proposing we would take care of 2015 today.
Okay.
And because the charter says equal to or better than PERS, and PERS has to tell us what PERS is for after this year.
It actually is state law, I believe, but yeah.
Yeah.
The ETOB test and the actuaries in the room, we're nowhere near place where we need to be concerned about ETOB. It's holistic PERS versus Fpdr. Ours 125 to 150% of a PERS benefit. That's not anything to be concerned about. It's not an annual COLA ETOB. It's holistic benefits.
Yeah, but COLA is a large part
over
of
time. Were we to stick at
benefit,
125, then 10 years from now we'd have a problem.
It hasn't been brought up, but I think it's in here to talk about retro also, so that would be something that I would think would be right too, to go back to get the 2% to compound not only for those 3 years, but to also repay the members who didn't receive the 2% for those 2 years also.
That's certainly one of the board's options.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't have an issue with 2013 at 2%. There's really no difference there. I think we would have approved 2 had this thing not been in front of us. For 2014, you're saying the difference is very, very slight. And so I guess
hundreds of dollars for the year.
Issue for that, and it will save you, and administratively, it'll save you a lot of headaches trying to go back and figure that out. 2015, I guess I have concerns by just if we did a flat 2%, that we're setting a precedent that we're ignoring the fact that PERS has 2 tiers. And so I guess I need to hear from maybe Ken to see if legally we're on firm footing doing that. I mean, I know our language in the charter is very vague about that, but it doesn't say we just use the highest rate.
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't say anything about matching it to PERS either. It says, and we're talking what the charter says about the limit, the cap, if you will.
Yeah, right.
So it says the percentage, you're capped by the percentage rate applied, and our opinion in the past has been that it is not inconsistent to do the percentage rate applied to any police officer or firefighter in the PERS system, or the percentage rate as applied to police officers and firefighters in the PERS system. So either position is defensible and reasonable. But I'm cognizant of what you say, Trustee Doherty, and I think that my position has consistently been and always been that the charter language says the amount and timing of the adjustment is at the board's discretion. So I prefer an outcome where the board takes it up on an annual basis and looks at what the CPI is for a given year, for example, is one factor. I mean, we have lived in an environment, I think, where only 7 of the last 25 years or something like that have been below 2%, where the CPI has been below 2%. But the discretion is there for a reason. The language is there for a reason. It doesn't say in the charter that you are to do what PERS does, and it doesn't say in the charter that you are to give a flat percentage rate.
Yeah, I only meant with respect to looking at the limit. I totally agree with you in
Yeah.
terms of, evaluating the adequacy and what's really needed based on actual CPI.
Right. So with regards to the limit, we have had this question come up in the past. I think it was in 2011 and in 2014. Is that, 12. And the board at that time chose to use the interpretation of maximum or any firefighter, the rate applied to any firefighter. But again, the provision says that you have discretion.
The other thing I would point out in that memo from PERS staff to their board was that even though staff is recommending a 2% for all on July 1, 2015, it looks like it will be trued up, if you will, to the blended methodology for the 2016 calculation, just taking into account they may have overpaid some people for July 1, 2015, just because of the timing and the system changes involved for them.
Well, I agree with my colleagues on 2013 and 2014. I racked my brain, and I find it hard to believe we would have approved anything but 2% for both those years. It's well below the CPI. For 2015, I do not want to get into a potential overpayment situation again, so I would prefer to wait on that.
When you say wait, that's for next month, or?
See if by chance we get something. I know it's highly unlikely.
Yeah, I'm wary of overpayment too, because been there, done that.
I've done that.
Don't want to do that again. And obviously, they're going to meet this week on the subject 2015, or on the subject of these recommendations. But I want to return to the question that Robert raised of what we said in our motion previously is always worth checking. And I believe it applied to 2013 and 14, not to future years, but that's.
I think it applied one. I mean, if you want to do the 2%, you can repass it and just not have to hold off on that decision.
Right,
if you
no,
don't want
I'm
to.
not trying to just simply be bound by the previous motion, but I'd like to be consistent with it. So I think that's what we were talking about.
I think there's votes on the board right now to approve 2% for both 2013, 2014.
Oh,
I could
that's
be wrong,
wrong.
but I don't think it'd be contradictory to the other.
It's not contradictory to that. In fact, I think it's true to the spirit and what we actually said, so I just wanted to verify that, so.
I guess the question I have about 2015, if I'm reading this right, the financial impact for the blended rate or the 2% is exactly the same by the calculations.
For those people who were already retired when I did the analysis, it's hundreds of dollars different for the year.
Yeah.
For the 30 or so May retirees, it's about $1,000 different for those 30 people, because they are the ones who have blended percentages.
Yeah, that's where we potentially get back into an overpayment situation, so.
Well, because what Ken says, you have the authority to do 2% for all, so it's not an overpayment. I mean,
I see.
you were
Right,
entitled to do
right.
it.
It would be good for that year.
Yeah, I think the only potential for an overpayment if we decided to do a blended.
Right,
And we
exactly.
wouldn't know how PERS was going to blend it.
Yeah.
But if we decided to do flat 2%.
Implicit in my comment was that I'm leaning towards a blended rate for 15.
So would the board like to wait for the June meeing? And
Well,
I will make a
Let's
motion, I will make a
dispose-
motion
yeah,
so we make, so it's on the record.
Well, let's dispose of the issue of 2013 and 14 first, right? Do you want to do that? So you want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion that for 2013 and 2014, the COLA be, I guess, increased because it was actually lower than that to the 2% per the Morrow ruling.
Second?
Retroactive.
Yes, sir.
Do you mind, do you want to address the retro payment in that? Is that part of your amendment?
Yeah, I thought.
Or
that was
what's-
part of it. Yes, so I mean, if that's not applied, there would be a retroactive payment to make the retirees whole.
Okay, let's get the
second that.
wording correct. I think we've got the idea correct. I'd like to get the wording correct.
2% COLA increase for 2013 and 2014, which would also be retroactive
For those years.
for those years.
Okay.
Can I just make a comment? I know Trustee Foch, you said per the Morrow ruling. I want to make it clear that the FPDR was not the subject of the Morrow ruling, and the applicability of the Morrow ruling to the FPDR is, I guess, twofold. Number one, to the FPDR 3 members directly in terms of our ongoing costs to the OPSERV system, and two, indirectly in how it relates to that limit on the percentage rate applied to the COLA that the board has the discretion to offer. And I say this notwithstanding and in the absence of contractual provisions outside of the charter itself, but I just wanted to point that out.
Good point. All right, further discussion on the motion? Any questions about the motion? Then roll call on that motion, please.
Mr. Doherty?
Aye.
Mr. Randall?
Aye.
Mr. Delaney?
Aye.
Mr. Bosch?
Aye.
Mr. Nick?
Aye.
Okay, that's adopted. And then what's the sense of the board about 2015? Do you want to act now? Do you want to wait? PERS is going to be, did you say this, PERS board is meeting this Friday?
Friday, yes.
So,
I guess my point is, and I've mentioned it before, and I hate to be labored, and I know that, like I said, we have a responsibility to ensure that this fund is whole in the future. We should not be short-sighted and make decisions that will affect future retirees or disabled members. With that being said, like I said, I've heard it loud and clear from the members that it is hard for them to keep up with the current cost of living. And I think it's the right and good thing to do without creating too much fiscal problems for the fund that we just approved the 2%. If I know that we're trying to guess what PERS is going to do, but it sounds like Ms. Hartline and the rest of the staff has crunched the numbers, and it's really not that significant of a difference in payments. Maybe I'm wrong. But I would rather get this out of the way and take care of the retirees and then look at it again next year when PERS has made their decision.
Yeah, the only thing that makes me nervous about this, and make sure I understand this, is not that the fiscal impact on the fund would be very different. It wouldn't be very different at all. And we can obviously bear the cost for this year, but that we might potentially get out of sync with some number of our member retirees by $1,000 or thereabouts. That concerns me. And maybe I misunderstood the mechanics of that. But if that's the case, I just don't want to wander back into that
I
problem.
think Ken is saying that the board can choose to do 2% for all, even if
For
PERS
this
does
year,
something else.
say.
Yes, for this year.
It's going to be 2% this year. We'll figure out the rest later, in effect, right? That would be the effect of that approach.
Right, I think it would actually
Figure out the blending thing later.
benefit the retired members versus adversely affect. I mean, we would not be in a legal situation where we were last time where we made an overpayment that we had to recoup. Am I understanding you correctly?
Correct.
Two different issues. So if we approve 2% blanket for 2015, you're correct. If we approve 2% because the blended rate got us to 2%, that's a different story because we need to know how the blended rate is resolved at PERS. My vote will be to wait and see what the blended rate comes out at PERS to be. We hopefully will know something better this Friday, but it's guesswork.
It's
Ken,
possible we may not know anything more.
we might not know anything.
By the June
right.
meeting.
This memo makes it sound they're going to give 2%, and they're going to figure the blended rate out next year, so I don't know how we would.
That seems to be staff's recommendation. Whether their board will perfect their thinking in that matter in some way, I don't know.
I guess I'm a little confused. You're talking about blended rate. Aren't we talking about the blended methodology?
Right.
Yes.
Because the rate is going to be, blended rate will be different for.
Depending on the cohort, or depending on the person.
For everyone who doesn't have all of his or her creditable service prior to October 8th, 2013. And it may not be a service split there. They may have something else that they do.
If a blended methodology is used by PERS for 2015, set aside staff's recommendation
They
that
do
we
something
just go
other
with
than the
2%
staff
and
recommendation.
call it good.
Right.
I think that's not something I'm interested in. If they go with the blended methodology and we were to go with 2% today and it turns out that there is not a firefighter or police officer that gets 2% under what's eventually approved by the PERS board, then we've created an overpayment situation, have we not?
No, not an overpayment situation per se, right?
We're not allowed to go above.
Well,
the
I
PERS
guess
max.
there will be a firefighter or police officer with 2% if they're already retired.
Yeah, everybody retired prior to October
So,
8th,
I'll
2013, for
get-
Your
sure.
prior statement
Yeah.
that we have discretion to pick any police officer pay under PERS.
Correct. Rate, percentage rate applied.
Clear as mud.
Sorting that out in my head, right? So again, help us with the scenario. There's a cohort of retirees who have retired more recently or are going to be retiring?
For example, the 30 who retired in this month.
Right. Okay, so they're retiring.
A couple of them would have
Hearing.
2% because they had 30 years of service prior to October 2013, but most of them would be in the 1.95 to 1.99 range, with an average for the group of 1.96
Blended.
blended.
But that's not a difference of $1,000 a year. That's a difference.
Well, it's a small percent on a small number of people, so it's a small number.
Right, I mean, per retiree, that's $50 or $100 a
Right,
year,
right. In total, it's about $1,000 for the 30.
But all the
For the year.
retirees before 2013 are going to get 2% on everything.
Right, right. But there's not, we're not going to be back into the situation that we were before, where individual retirees are at variance from our expectations or our limitations by hundreds or thousands of dollars each. We're talking minor sums for individual plan members, right? It's got to be hard to watch people do math in their heads.
Well, I think
Especially us.
even if, so it's not an overpayment. If we decide to give 2%, we have the right to do that because there will be a 2% percentage rate applied to somebody in PERS.
Lots of
So
them.
even
A lot
if
of
they
people.
decide next year that some people are going to have 1.96 figured into their PERS rate,
Yeah.
we'll still be fine. We're not going to have to, there's going to be no requirement for us to come back and get the money from those people. Correct?
Yes,
There will be.
we're
Yes,
talking
there
about
will
the
be.
authority in the charter, yes.
Okay.
And I understand what you're saying. I think that next year, when you look at it again, I don't think we should blanket go 2% for eternity, right?
Right.
You know, I both agree and I disagree. I mean, what we're talking about here is what is the limit of the board's authority here. And they've confirmed there will be a police officer under PERS getting 2%. I don't think that means we should jump in to do that. I think we ought to learn what the blended methodology is, and we ought to abide by the spirit of what we tried to adopt before. And we're going to have to blend methodologies in the future, perhaps. We haven't decided that yet, but that's what's going to happen under PERS. You're going to get credit for prior services performed, and you're going to get a higher COLA. Newer work done is going to get a lower COLA. I'm not prepared to say 2% today going forward is the right thing to do,
So
Going forward into,
including 15.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, well, okay, I'm reaching a different conclusion, which is there's a benefit to simplicity and clarity here as well. If there's a minor cost difference to the fund, and if the board is clear that we're going to, and I am clear, that we are going to look carefully at the blending methodology that PERS perfects over however many meetings it takes them to get the details worked out, and that we intend to that we are likely to follow that blending methodology in future years beyond 2015, then I would be inclined to cut to the chase this year, given that we've got a very minor dollar impact on the fund. It's a 2% for 2015, asterisk. We're going to return to the question of blending when we do our job on this annual basis again next year.
And I understand that, but I think the precedential value of ignoring it for 15 is something we ought to not jump into today.
Well, I'm not suggesting we ignore it. I would suggest that we round off here this year, which is
No, I get
exactly
it.
what the number one staff recommendation to PERS was, unless they're going to overturn their staff recommendation. They're going to do this, right? They're going to pay 2% this year. Then they're going to recalculate and adjust in 2016. We may do the same thing, right?
It's up to you, how you all instruct us to do it. That's what we're looking at here.
That's-
And that is an option that you can do. You can do percent now and say it's 2% and not adjust it out, or you can, when you get your blended methodology, come back and true up for 2015, which is, that creates the overpayment that I think some of you were talking about.
The next question I got then is, if we don't do what PERS is going to do, are we going to put us in a liability situation for a lawsuit? Is there going to be some buddy that's going to ask us, why aren't you doing what they're doing? I don't know.
So I guess the answer to that is the terms of our charter are much better than the terms of ORS 238.360. So a lawsuit against the, recognizing that Mr. Kaplan is sitting in the back of the room, that the lawsuit for violating the terms of our own charter, I think, had that been an issue, we would have already been sued. We would have been sued at the same time that the state got sued with regards to the PERS statutes. The collective bargaining agreements, on the other hand, you are well aware of the maintenance of standards clauses in the collective bargaining agreements, and that's a whole different kettle of fish, and there may be issues there. That's why I think it's that putting yourself in a particular place by saying we will do this and not utilizing your discretion within the authority and the cap in the charter is a little troublesome. So that's what I would say about that.
But we can use our discretion either way in this case.
Yes.
Go in either direction.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So I would be inclined to do that. I think understand the concerns you're raising. If I thought individual members were going to get in a situation where we were significantly overpaid to them, I would not want to get back into that territory. We obviously got that spot in a very different way before, but this isn't that place.
And if you-
I will vote no on it, but it's not a strong no. I just had bad experiences deviating from the norm in the past, and I won't go there again.
I wasn't here.
Well, one thing the board might consider is putting in the language of your motion that due to the uncertainty with the PERS calculation, the board for 2015 only decides to do.
Yeah.
Well, I like the way the mayor stated it earlier, that this is a one-year decision. We're going to look at the blended methodology that comes out of PERS. We recognize it might take them months, if not a year, to get there. So we're doing this today to give certainty to the current retirees.
So I'll make that motion that we do set a 2% COLA rate for this year, with the understanding that we're going to watch the PERS deliberations about how they're going to blend rates for future years carefully, and return to those questions about how we set the 2016 rate, understanding that we may more exactly follow PERS's route once they determine it, because again, we're going to assume that they're going to address this in their next meeting, or maybe the meeting after that, or meeting after that. But for the next year, I think it gives our members a lot of certainty if we say we're empowered to grant a 2% COLA. It's actually the staff recommendation for the state to grant a 2% COLA. So on the basis that we will revisit the question for 2016 of both methodology and rate, then I would move that we'd set it for 2% for this year. So anybody want to second that?
Second.
Long motion. So further discussion of that motion? Now let's take a roll call on that.
Campbell,
Aye.
Mr. Delaney,
No, and again, I don't disagree with the amount, and the financial impacts can be minimal. I'd prefer that we wait and see how PERS resolves it.
Mr. Foch,
Aye.
Mr. Lehman,
Aye.
Mr. Doherty.
I'm going to vote in favor of this. I share Trustee Delaney's concerns about this a little bit, but I'm going to vote yes for really administrative, expediency. And I think that I just want us in the future to understand that this cap is a discretionary, we view that in a discretionary manner, and that this vote for 2% is not just adopting the highest any retiree rate. I just want that understood with respect to my feeling. Aye.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Let's see. Any informational items, Sam, to report to us today?
Had nothing on updates, future meeting agenda. Okay, yeah, now June 23rd, back on your schedule to do what you wish to do. So we don't have a board meeting on the 23rd.
Okay.
We will have a July board meeting. At that point, we'll present to you our disability timeliness study. And then also in September, we do have some rule changes. Most of them are fairly minor. It's just to clean up some stuff and bring some stuff in compliance with some laws.
That's in September?
September.
Okay. So we will not be meeting in June, you said.
Not June, July and September are 2 board meetings.
Okay. Any questions about that? Anything else, Sam? That
You
need
do
to
have
report?
your expense list here. If you have any questions, let us know.
Okay.
Anybody? Okay, no testimony on that
On
one?
the rule changes in September, are you going to try to get those, do you have those prepared already, or is it something you're still working on?
We're working on them, and some of them are minor. We'll have them posted in different ways depending upon the nature of the rule
Okay.
change. Some of them are
Sooner
just
the
one-
better, it's always for light rating.
Yeah.
And we're continuing our collaboration with the labor unions in regards to some of these things. I know they're mostly housekeeping, but
Most of the ones are, the approach I've been using is the housekeeping ones. I was not going to do the one beforehand. We do have one where we're going to change how the boards are elected. We will have the three unions will have their opportunity to come in and talk to us with it. But most of another one is to bring us in compliance with a Supreme Court decision on definition of spouse. I don't think we need to bring that up because that's just got to be what the federal wording says it has to be. So none of these are major. I think the only one that we were going to get input on is the board elections.
I think we've been very successful as of late collaborating, and I would like to continue.
I think so, and we'll do that.
Okay, and then do we need to convene an executive
Yes,
session
we do.
next? Okay, so if there's no other business to come before the regular board meeting, I'm going to close the regular board meeting. Thank you all for coming, and we will be reconvening in a moment in closed executive session to discuss potential litigation.